I'm thinking you might remember from last year when we had a little bit of discussion about Thanksgiving, and I I have a subscription to a Substack writer who I think last year when we talked about it, he was interviewing a professor, David Silverman, on the Thanksgiving myth. And you might recall that it was that widespread misconception about Thanksgiving and celebrated by the colonists when their uh, uh, descendants in the unbroken chain from 1621 onward. But the question was, why did it take 240 years for that succession to happen? And we heard from this Substack person around colonial England and the colonists celebrating Thanksgiving, in England whenever the governments pronounced them. And and so there might be Thanksgiving in the spring or the summer, but in New England, the time became standardized in late fall and early winter because people closed their account books for the year and they settled their debts. And there was also the Yankee tradition that finally became the national holiday in 1863 because Abraham Lincoln, had the idea planted in his head that announcing a national holiday centered on the idea of offering thanks for what's good in our lives would be sort of a unifying act. So he pronounced Thanksgiving and the tradition stuck from that point on. And also there was that conversation about how in Plymouth, um, the English colonists of Plymouth and the surrounding Wampanoag Indians first started in 1621. And, it wasn't like that meal was famous. What were they eating? They were eating corn and fowl. But there was a minister that published this primary source about Plymouth Colony, and that description of the feast and with the Winnipogs in 1621. And there was that little footnote at the bottom where he said this was the first Thanksgiving, the harvest festival of New England. And nobody really made that connection before. And so that little footnote went on for a couple hundred years before then it became, Lincoln made the proclamation. And that same author on the Substack that I like to read, this year he interviewed somebody, his name is Ben Tumman, and he spoke with a professor, Anne Blue Wills, about the invention of the holiday as we know it today, like how it's been modernized. And so his Substack publication is called Skipped History, and I really like it. If you don't do any Substack reading, it's an interesting platform. Another member of our PIMC Sangha, Abby Ross Adams, has a publication on it too. But so in Skipped History, he talks about histories that are overlooked and underexamined, and events and moments and people that shaped American history. So this article is kind of interesting, called Pilgrims in Progress, and how magazines made Thanksgiving. And so he has this conversation with Professor Wills, and she chronicles how this 19th century women's magazines, and one magazine editor in particular, created contemporary Thanksgiving. And she's the chair of religious studies at Davidson College. And there's this condensed transcript that's edited, and it's presented on the Substack to be able to be read or listened to. But the fascinating thing really around that conversation was that this woman who what it was like in 16 no she was in the 1839 end of the 1839 1840. She was married, she had 5 children, and then her husband died, and as a result she had to find a way to employ herself. So she began writing for she began writing, contributing to a magazine. And she basically, over time, uh, due to her politics and um, beliefs, determined that women who read this magazine needed to know some recipes and they should learn how to cook, and they could, provide meals on a regular basis to their families and stay home and take care of the home and the hearth. And that as they read the magazine, they would begin to, do that all of the time. And it was even her idea to have it be on Thursday, because then it would still allow for women to have meals provided by Sunday. They could still cook their meal for Sundays. And it's really interesting. I thought maybe if it interests you at all, I would play a little bit of it. I mean, because the other thing that I wanted us to talk about really, around this whole season is about gratitude, and, how practicing gratitude can really have far reaching effects for improving our mental health and our relationships with others, and, sort of living our life with gratitude, helping us notice these sometimes little wins. We're not always feeling that much gratitude, but just noticing, like when a stranger opens the door for us, or when it's sunny on our walk, and just building capacity for gratitude. So it's those two things that I sort of wanted to talk about in terms of giving thanks, the modern idea of Thanksgiving, and then how we can really pay attention to affirming good things that we receive and acknowledging the role that other people provide in our lives for goodness. So does it interest you to hear any of this interview? There's 2 yeses, a sort of maybe, a couple of maybes. Let me see if I can pull it up, and I'll just play a little bit of it. You'll get the context of it. Let's see. See if you can hear it.
They got its real start in 19th century women's magazines. And there is largely one woman at the center of women's magazines at the time, and at the center of your article. Her name is Sarah Josepha. Am I saying that right?
Josepha. I don't know. There aren't many Josephas running around these days, so I didn't really. I'm sure somebody out there knows 19th century pronunciation, but I don't.
Well, maybe somebody will need to name a child Josepha and become a new authority. But so, who was Sarah Josepha Hale?
She was a wife and a mother who she and her husband had 5 children, and this is in the early 19th century. So she was born in 1788, kind of at the end of the Revolutionary period, beginning of the new nation, quote unquote, new nation. And she met and married her husband, and they had 5 children together, and then he died unexpectedly. And she needed to be able to support this family. And she, as the expectation of women of her class, she was a white woman. I believe one of her male relatives, maybe her father, was in the Revolutionary War. So she would have been wouldn't have been called middle class at the time, but she was not a poor woman, and she didn't want to become a poor woman with these children. So she was somewhat educated. She could read and write, and she started writing so that she could support her family. And over the course of getting published, in little kind of small women's magazines, she came to the notice of a magazine publisher, a magazine editor in Boston. This is all happening in New Hampshire and New England. And Louis Godey was the owner of Godey's Ladies Book. And so he brought her to Boston to edit this magazine. And she proceeded to be the editor for about 40 years, almost until she died. She died in 1879. She edited the magazine until 1877. So her magazine really dominated through that very critical part of the 19th century, over, antebellum through the Civil War and almost into the end of Reconstruction. So she was a writer. She was an editor. She was an advocate for some women's rights. It gets a little bit complicated because before Seneca Falls, before the beginning of what we now historians think of as first wave feminism in the 1840s, she was, and there were other women who were involved in this too, one being Catherine Beecher, who was Harriet Beecher Stowe's sister, the oldest sister in the Beecher family. Sarah Hale was an advocate for women's education that went beyond what had been the customary education for women, again, white women, women married to property men. What Hale and other women in that antebellum period advocated for, and again, these are women in the Northeast, was a more rigorous reading and writing education that studied history, and the aim was to fit women to be Republican mothers, Republican with a small r, women who could then have children and educate those children to be good citizens of a republic.
And just to clarify for anybody reading or listening, Seneca Falls, the Seneca Falls Convention, which is
right,
the launch of the suffrage.
1848. Yeah.
Interesting. And so as you're alluding, there's a huge. You write that she dominated the American periodical landscape during the 19th century through Godey's.
Yeah.
So there are a lot of people reading these magazines, and hers being one of the most read. And you're alluding to a shifting American scene in the 1800s, the early 1800s, mid 1800s. There's the Industrial Revolution. There's increasing amounts of immigration, particularly of Catholic and Jewish immigrants from Europe. And this, in some ways, leads to Hale's views of Thanksgiving being this kind of crystallization of American virtue. Can you talk a little bit about her perceptions of this changing American scene and how this fed into her beginning to write about Thanksgiving?
Yeah, and you followed up on Seneca Falls, 1848. I should probably say that Hale, the ironies here, the history of suffrage and women's rights, the woman question, she was not an advocate for women having the vote. Women's power, in her understanding, was not with the vote. And I think Catherine Beecher was in agreement with her on this too. There's a separation between women's rights and women's right to vote. They're not necessarily the same thing. But the power of women in American culture, in U.S. culture, was to be of influence and not of direct engagement. So women could petition, but she was not particularly interested in having a vote.
You mentioned the Beechers here. And Harriet Beecher Stowe, sister of Catherine, was the author of Uncle Tom's Cabin, the abolitionist novel. And Hale, just to kind of fill out more of her viewpoint here, Hale was not necessarily an abolitionist either. Before going to Godey's, you talked about a novel she wrote.
Right,
that was anti-abolitionist.
Yeah. I mean, my sense was, especially from this novel called Northwood that Hale published after Uncle Tom's Cabin is published in 1852. Hale's novel is appreciative of certain things about Southern culture, and including, in my reading, including kind of hierarchies of patriarchy and race patriarchy. I mean, there are all kinds of stories, fictional stories that run in Godey's that are very kind of stereotypically racist and play on all the stereotypes of what Black people are like and what Black people are supposed to, what place in society they're supposed to hold vis-a-vis white people. I think I ran across some reference to her as an abolitionist, and I don't get that from Northwood.
A bit after reading your article,
Yeah.
I did some digging into Northwood,
Uh-huh.
and you definitely do not come away from Northwood thinking that she's an abolitionist.
Mm-mm. She was very interested, back to your question, I mean, she's very interested in orderly, kind of the orderliness of society. And for her, here she is, a white woman from New England, Protestant. She's a member of an Episcopal church, so she's not even an evangelical. She occupies a pretty conservative niche in her milieu. So the increase of immigration from Europe, the increase in the number of Roman Catholics, I think that was more worrisome to her than maybe Jewish immigrants to New York or to Philadelphia or to Charleston, say, because her understanding of the new nation was that it was founded on this kind of combination of Christian Republican principles that privileged the Protestant vision. I mean, independent, individual ability to reason and think about, to read scripture for oneself, to reflect on the meaning of that scripture for one's own life. And so I remember, I think this appears in Godey's. There's a story or a kind of a report on the influx of Catholic immigrants into New England that is just like sounding the alarm. This was something that concerned her a lot because it seemed to her that if you changed the religious complexion, so to speak, of that, particularly that part of the country, which she understood as the cradle of everything truly American, then you were going to change the complexion, again, so to speak, of the whole country. And that concerned her a great deal.
And you write that giving thanks became in the pages of the 19th century's popular magazines, Godey's first and foremost, an occasion to celebrate the Republican traditions of rural domestic life, concepts that related more to perceived stresses of the 19th century than to the realities of 17th century Massachusetts life. You know, going off of that a little bit, can you discuss how Hale advocated for a Thanksgiving meal through Godey's, and maybe give us the contours of this meal that she advocated for, and in comparison to what the original quote-unquote Thanksgiving or a Puritan concept of lowercase t Thanksgiving might have been.
Yeah. I'll start with the last thing first. The Puritan Thanksgiving would have been a lowercase t. I mean, for us, I don't think they were big into lowercase, uppercase. But theologically, the reason that Puritan communities, Massachusetts Bay, for instance, or Plymouth, which is where this kind of first Thanksgiving gets located, having a set day in the calendar for Thanksgiving, they would have found that presumptuous because, remember, these are Calvinists, and they understand themselves to be the particular objects of God's concern, which can be a good thing, but can also bring, if you're not behaving in the way that God imagines you should, can bring punishment. So that, you kind of always have to be on your toes, and you have to be ready. If something good happens, then you attribute that to God's benevolence, and you do, like, have a day of Thanksgiving. But if something bad happens, then you read that as chastisement. Again, God is chastising us because we are God's particular people, And so you would have a day of repentance, a day of mourning, of lamentation. And so these were days that were called by the leaders of the community as needed and not set on particular days and particular months in some kind of recurring pattern.
And if you overcooked the turkey on the Thanksgiving, you'd have a day of repentance immediately following.
You would, if you have lumps in your gravy, then you're really in for it.
Yeah, no Thanksgiving anymore.
No more Thanksgiving. So that's kind of one of the dimensions of a Puritan or a 17th century, early 17th century Thanksgiving, that it was an occasional day, meaning it was something that could happen when it needed to happen, but it wasn't a set day in the calendar. So the Puritans, the Pilgrims, they're settler colonist communities. Then we go through the Revolutionary period, and Hale is doing her thing on the other side of that break from England. And she's not the only one who read into the successful fight for independence that God had a special mission for the United States of America. American independence was one thing that she wanted to lift up, but she also wanted to celebrate the beauty of the land, the goodness of the people, and she's thinking about her, white people in the Northeast, particularly the valor of men and women who worked for American independence. And she's really building a multifaceted argument to try to catch everybody. One of the things that she points out is that Americans celebrate July 4th, summertime holiday. Americans celebrate the president's birthday. So Washington's birthday is something that is celebrated. And at that point, it's just Washington's birthday. That's kind of winter time. And she sees Thanksgiving falling in the harvest season as being a way to kind of balance out the calendar. So there's a summer holiday, there's a winter holiday, and you can have Thanksgiving to celebrate the harvest. But not only that, these other holidays are kind of public festival celebrations. And the Thanksgiving, as she's proposing it, is domestic in the, house meaning of domestic. It's a holiday that takes place at home. It's a holiday that, maybe even more importantly, women are the kind of ministers of this holiday. And so it focuses on the food and the gathering of family so that the mother, the woman of the household, can really display her skill as a cook or as someone who organizes the cooking and someone who keeps a home in a way that is well.
Explore how Thanksgiving as we know it today got.
There you have it. Now we've celebrated it all these years just because of her. I think that's why I like celebrating Indigenous Peoples Day instead, the next day. I mean, to think, she really had a lot of influence, as being a woman that could read and write and a woman that wanted to support her children. And, as a result, influenced so many people for 40 years through one magazine. And we're still doing it. We're still doing it. What do you make of it? Anything?
Well, it's so fascinating to me, just thinking about the time and the way people thought about things and women's place, and some people beginning to question that, and all of that is, oh my God, the Catholics moving in, that was fascinating too.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Well, I've been actually coincidentally reading a lot about Native American history. I started reading. I got it from the library. I heard about this book. I got it from the library. It's about it. Probably the thing probably weighs like, I don't know, 10 pounds. It's this humongous volume about Native American culture, and so I've been thinking about that a lot, and so particularly feeling some conflict about this holiday.
Yeah.
In terms of the myth around, how the friendly relations between the native peoples and the folks who came and destroyed everything in their path and destroyed their culture and everything. So I just said, and we have the big family thing here, and I didn't want to say, well, I'm not going to go because I don't support that. So I decided to look online for some foods that are traditionally Native American, and that's what I'm bringing for Thanksgiving. So I'm making Three Sisters stew and cornbread.
Oh. Mm-hmm.
To share with my
Mm-hmm.
family. I don't eat turkey anyways.
Yeah. Good idea. Yeah. I mean,
this book, if anybody's interested, it's called Project 562. I have it in the library, but it's hard to get because there's holds on it.
Mm-hmm.
And the name of the book, where it comes from, is that at the time that this woman started putting this book together, 562 was the number of federally recognized Native American tribes. Do you know this book?
I do, but I have not seen it.
What?
I haven't seen it. It's been referred to me from quite a few people.
Oh yeah, it's so anyway. So the genesis of this book is the woman who wrote it is a professional journalist who is also Native American, and I can't remember the story of how she decided to do this, but she took, I don't know, like 10 years or something and sold everything she owned and spent 10 years living on the road and decided she wanted to do a professional photograph of at least one person from every one of those 562 peoples. And she did it in this really careful, respectful way where she would go and spend a lot of time with the person and in their, culture and stuff, and let them tell their story and let them decide what they were going to wear. And a lot of them wore traditional Native garb and where they wanted to be photographed. And it's a very, to me, it's been a very powerful book because it partly because it talks a lot about all of the ways in which everybody in this room's forefathers have oppressed and terrorized and et cetera the Native American people, but also their resiliency and the beauty of their culture and how, to me, how much we have to learn from them. It's been helpful in my quest. I was talking earlier with Kendall about my quest for learning to love the winter. And of course, the Native people, they lived out in the, and some of the people in this book are like from Alaska and places like that. And just having a different relationship to the earth and the land and everything like that. Mm-hmm. So anyway.
Yeah, thanks for that, Cynthia.
Really highly recommend it.
Mm-hmm. I think you're the second person in 2 weeks that had mentioned it to me. I mean, this is fascinating that, that Hale, argued that Thursday was the most convenient day of the week, and, women could then still prepare for Sunday. And then people began to write back to her that they were following her instructions, and then Hale let her readers know that there was a new trend and didn't they want to participate, and all that was based on myth, and I mean, part of the new tradition, Hale also insisted that the celebrants travel home to be with their families. And I mean, of course, at that point, many Americans had lived with their families, but the railroads were growing and cities were industrializing, and more people left home for work to places like Philadelphia and New York and Boston. And so they would, come back to the protective cocoon, safe from the cities, and go back home. And all these different dynamics, shifting views of women's roles, like you said, Doug, and increasing immigration and industrialization. And then she badgered the national leaders to add Thanksgiving to the calendar national celebration. And then Abraham Lincoln finally issued the first nationwide declaration in 1863. So, how do we reflect on the invention of Thanksgiving today? And her motivations are a little troubling. We don't even touch upon, like you're saying, Cynthia, how much indigenous history and resistance and suffering the holiday obscures. And I mean, most of us grew up loving the holiday, and I still love the colors and the flavors, and but there's a lot of heartache in it. That the white Europeans came to the New World and established civilization on the continent, and I wonder if anything will change about this holiday. I mean, that's where, to me, what I do in my mind to make it somehow worthy of celebration is I include things like gratitude. We take this time to be with our families and to have gratitude for each other, and gratitude to our ancestors, really. I mean, we're here, we got here. And just observing the ability to, like, how often do I actually say thank you? And how much of it is a habitual response, or is it an afterthought? And really paying attention and maybe noticing one interaction where a thank you arises, and to stop for a minute and just take note. Can I name what I really feel grateful for? So I think during this time period, it's just important to share our gratitude with each other. After all, I'm sure that research has found that expressing gratitude can strengthen relationships. And the next time our partner or our friend or some family member does something that we appreciate, we should let them know.
Well, I've had a regular gratitude practice for, I don't know, 10 years or so. I have this little group of everybody in the group lives in Sacramento, because that's where it was. That's where I joined it. But it's like a little email group that we do every day, that we send to each other and list, a few things that we're grateful for. And I notice it has an impact on my state of mind, because I find myself during the day thinking of things to come up with. It's like, what can I put in my gratitude? It's like I'll notice, oh, that's something I can be grateful for, to put in my little, email in the morning, and so it highlights that. It highlights the things in my life that are positive and that are blessings, and even when things aren't kind of going the way I would like them to, like I had been in that practice long enough that I would find, like, say, when I was going through, the very difficult health stuff that I've been through in the last several years, that I could always step back and say, well, I could be going through this shit and be living in a refugee camp with no health care.
Mm-hmm.
It's like there's always something you can
Mm-hmm.
find
Mm-hmm.
in pretty much any situation.
Mm-hmm.
It really helps one's state of mind.
Yeah. Yeah.
I wanted to point out one of the sayings that I kind of live by in my mind and say out loud almost on a daily basis, but I certainly could be more aware and there, but for the grace of the goddess go I. And I think that's a very all-encompassing humility and thanks
Mm-hmm.
to just take that moment and because it often happens in interaction and it's a
Yeah.
bubble,
Mm-hmm.
you know, and it's like, God, aren't I lucky, you know? But I do say it out loud a lot, and I say it to my children throughout the years. There's a couple of things that I say, and they all look at me, but it's so interesting because my grandsons love that saying, and they, and this is why it's quite the come on, Grandma. It's quite the come on. I mean, they found out so early on that girls' heads just went, what? What did you just say? You know, there, but for the grace of the goddess go I. And so then there's just a whole explanation and it's like, oh, so some funny things have happened around it.
Mm-hmm. I bet so.
The other piece, pardon?
I bet so.
Yeah. The other piece that I was thinking about is that, you know, of course, through the 60s, San Quentin Island was taken over.
Alcatraz.
Alcatraz, yeah, right. San Quentin was on is still on Alcatraz. Yes, thank you. And we started calling, you know, I mean, I was around for the 60s in California. We started calling Thanksgiving unthanksgiving. And there are a lot of Native American tribal ceremonies around consciously undoing, not the thanks, because the thanks is, you know, this is that difference between this kind of white Christian the way of thinking about things and then the Native American way of thinking about things that is just so much more all-encompassing and healthier and more earth connected, relational.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And you know, this idea of unthanksgiving, but I like this idea, Kendall, that you're talking about of you know, what are we grateful for, and what, you know, what are we being graced with, and how we can also bring that to others.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. And I think, Cynthia, what you're saying is really important. It's important to write it down because thinking about it is one thing, but really taking the time to write something down usually makes us think a little bit more about it, and it's kind of cements it in our mind more, you know, like when we're stressed out and we sort of feed negativity through the choices that we make as a way to, you know, just kind of avoid what's happening. And if we really take the time to write something down, 2 or 3 things every day, like you're saying, Cynthia, that it really makes it a gratitude practice. trying to affirm and remember the good things that we've received and the role that other people play in providing our lives with goodness. And just observing, taking one interaction a day and say thanks. Stop and take note and share our gratitude with others.
Mm-hmm.
And even, we've been talking about how do we feel things in our body. Well, even coming to our senses, that through our senses, the ability to touch and to see and to smell and to taste and to hear and to think, we can gain appreciation for what it means to be human. And what an incredible miracle it is to be alive. And, seen through the lens of gratitude, the body's not just a miraculous construction, but it's also a very precious gift.
Mm.
Well, our time is sort of drifting by. Janice, is there anything you would like to share? It's been so lovely having you. I'm always happy when I see you.
Thank you. Well, I guess I struggle with Thanksgiving. I'm all in favor of gratitude, and I guess that's what I focus on is, my gratitude for my family, for everything. But it's abhorrent to me what we did to the Native American people.
Yeah.
And, the idea of connecting Thanksgiving with that is really hard. I like the unthanksgiving idea, Sherry. And, I want to
Not
be
my
great.
idea.
Yeah, we want it to be grateful. That's great. And and having a holiday around being grateful for everything and everyone and all of that, but it's so tied up with our history that it just breaks my heart. I don't know.
Yeah, I think
Hard.
anybody that even
Commercial.
anybody that even thinks creatively, you have to really deny a lot and ignore a lot, but if we at least educate ourselves to know that it really has nothing to do with the colonial and the indigenous people, which is why it's helpful to know that the next day is actually celebrated as Indigenous Peoples Day. Now let's celebrate that.
Yeah.
And have on Thanksgiving just be a day of gratitude, but never mind tying it to the colonialists and the rape.
Maybe we could rename it Gratitude Day. I think we've got to get rid of the Thanksgiving because it's just tied up with that whole myth.
Maybe you need to start writing a magazine article.
And get rid of the killing of turkeys while we're at it. That's my
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Stop killing the poor turkeys.
Yeah.
Well, I'd like to start off by saying, Kendall, I think that you are an amazing teacher, and I thank you for your time and your energy and your undying love of the Dharma and what you give to us and to all of those around you. You are a magnificent human being.
Here.
Thank you.
Here.
Yes.
And
yes.
Cynthia, you are a gift. Every time I see you, it brings a smile to my face. You always have something that touches my heart. And Doug, you make me smile. The moment I see you, I smile inside, and I think outside also. I love to hear you speak with us, and you reached out to me in such a meaningful and different way than I had been in the past. And I'm just so glad to be sharing this time with you. And Janice, although we don't know each other well, I am always happy to see you here in your loveliness and this lovely background that you have, and to share your heart with us. And thank you.
Thanks, you.
I used to say,
Very, very sweet. Very, very sweet. I have one last thing to share, and I think that Larry Ward is going to tell us the truth. Let me see, where is it? Where is it? Share screen. I don't have a big enough screen showing. Hang on a minute. Share screen options. I don't need the options. I just need to share the screen. I lost my share screen ability. Oh, there it is. Okay. Yeah. Okay, Larry Ward. If you haven't ever heard Larry Ward, he is a fun practitioner. And this is what he has to say.
say all the time that if the practice is difficult, you're not doing it right. It's natural. It's easy. We're breathing already. Just pay attention and nourish more of your intuitive side, your dream side, your woo-woo side. Crank it up, because we need all the woo-woo we can get to counter the non-woo-woo. I used to say all the time that if the practice is difficult, you're not doing it right. It's natural. It's easy. We're breathing already. Just pay attention and nourish more of your intuitive side, your dream side, your woo-woo side. Crank it up, because we need all the woo-woo we can get to counter the non-woo-woo.
So if you don't know Larry Ward, look him up. He's got a most recent, regular hour-long talk that's that I have really appreciated. I like listening to him from time to time. It's called Be Beautiful, Be Yourself. And it's one of, it's like a 53-minute Be Beautiful, Be Yourself. So until we meet again, thank you so much. I wouldn't be here teaching Sherry if it wasn't for you and you, Cynthia, and Doug and Janice. All we need is a few of us together. And I totally appreciate the ability to be able to be a spiritual friend. So
Thank you, everybody.
may we be our woo-woo selves, be beautiful, be ourselves.
Happy Grateful Day.
Happy Grateful
May you all
Day.
have much to be grateful for.
Be grateful.
There, but for the
Grace of
Yep.
Goddess, go I.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah.
Bye for now. Mwah.